Can faith and science coexist? Is scientific inquiry compatible with a religious worldview? Now, scientific research is increasingly shedding light on various aspects of human life. Our origins, our place in the universe, the nature of human consciousness, and our relationship to other living creatures on this planet. And many of these findings, as we know, are challenging and even clearly disproving the claims to truth made by traditional religious belief systems. It is also true, however, that religious institutions, communities, and individuals of today are responding to the challenges of science in very different ways. Traditionalist and fundamentalist approaches may well coexist with very liberal and progressive readings and interpretations. The question of how faith fundamentally relates to science is ever present, because religious thought and practice still remain strong, impacting on public and political life and on the public discourse of today's world. And of course, from a Swedish point of view, a clear reminder of this fact is the upcoming visit of Pope Francis to Sweden, commemorating the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation next week. So, is there a way to bridge the gap, to reconcile the differences? Can religious thought be seen as somehow complementing a scientific understanding of the world? Do science and religion, in fact, represent different areas of inquiry? Or is there simply an insurmountable conflict between the two? Tonight, these questions will be addressed by two prominent speakers, Lawrence Krauss and Roland Poirier Martinsson. And before introducing the two, let me say just something about the plan for tonight's debate. Now, each speaker is given an opening statement of about 5 minutes, and this is then followed by the actual debate. And there will be a session for questions from the audience after this. And so finally, there will be a couple of short closing remarks to summarize and reflect upon what has been said tonight. So let me welcome then tonight's speakers. Lawrence Krauss of the Arizona State University is a theoretical physicist and cosmologist. And he's the author of a vast number of scientific studies, but also of several books in popular science, including The Physics of Star Trek and A Universe from Nothing. He's an advocate of the public understanding of science and scientific skepticism. And he appeared a couple of years ago with Richard Dawkins in the documentary film The Unbelievers, which some of you may have seen, where the two spoke publicly around the world about the importance of reason and science in our time. And Professor Krauss is actually in Sweden now very briefly visiting a physics conference in Gothenburg, so we are of course delighted that you could make the time to be here and participate tonight in this debate. Please welcome Lawrence Krauss.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I am very pleased to introduce also Roland Poirier Martinsson, a conservative philosopher and author, and also a representative of the Roman Catholic faith, which must of course be mentioned in this context. He too is the author of several books, among others a biography of Archimedes, Archimedes, matematiker, vapenmakare, stjärnskådare. And much of his writing is concerned precisely with the relations between science and religion, culture and society. And his doctoral thesis, by the way, was on the justification of empirical beliefs. Very interesting. I hope we will get back to that tonight as well. So I will be calling upon Roland now to make the first opening statement of tonight. Please welcome Roland Poirier Martinsson.
Is this on now?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's not the first time that I I'm invited to the Humanists in Sweden, one of your events, and I want to say that I've lived in the States, in America, for a number of years, traveled in Europe, England, and I think that there is a lot of vile discourse between activists, atheists, humanists, and activist Christians. We haven't seen much of that in Sweden, probably for a number of reasons, but I do believe that one of the reasons is that the association of humanists in Sweden is intellectually grounded and respectful, while not agreeing with the position of, for instance, the Catholic Church, always open to discussion. Is that for me to stop talking?
Yeah, time's up.
And in that spirit, I also want to call this a discussion rather than a debate. So I think that the question is the relationship between religion and science. First of all, that is a question that needs to be specified. I'm a Roman Catholic, and I'm a representative, as you said, of the faith. I was afraid for a second you were going to say of the church, which would be scary, especially as Franciscus is arriving in a day or two. But I'm a representative of the Roman Catholic faith and its view on science. I'm not here to defend fundamentalist views, whether they be Christian or Jewish or Muslim or any other faith. I do not consider myself a fundamentalist. I do believe that the Catholic Church is responsible for inventing science rather than opposing it. So the relationship between science and religion, can they coexist as some parallel tracks? Will they have to be in conflict because of different worldviews? Or could they even pull in the same direction? A very simple answer, first of all, is science and religion can coexist because they already do. We have religion in the open liberal democracies, and we have science, and both thrive. So, case closed as far as that. Can they coexist on an individual level? Some 60, 70 years ago, I think it was, physicists, tenured physicists at American universities were polled whether they were Christian believers or not. And roughly 40% said that they were. Only a few years ago, the same poll was conducted. Roughly 40% said that they were still. At the same time, they are brilliant physicists at great universities in America. So, on a societal level, on an individual level, science and religion can obviously coexist. It's, case closed as far as that, I think. The reason for this is that science and religion do not make similar claims. Science is interested in nature. How does it work? The forces, mechanisms. How do we predict? How do we manipulate nature? Those are not religious questions, issues, mandates in any which way. religion is concerned with what's right and what's wrong, as opposed to what's true and what's false. Religion is, in addition to that, something that speaks to the spiritual aspect of being a human being. In that sense, there is no conflict. And I'm not here to defend, again, for instance, intelligent design. I believe that that is a dead end. I think that neo-Darwinism answers the questions of how we evolved, how plants, animals evolved. I do not think, and most biologists I think would agree, that it answers the question of how life started. If science happens to come up with a credible, tested, corroborated answer to that question, I don't see that as a challenge to my faith, the faith that I struggle with. I think there are, finally, before I leave the floor to Lawrence, three ways. I said that the Catholic Church invented science. It's a strong claim. I think there are three aspects that would defend that statement. One is not Catholic, but more a Western metaphysical view on the world, which is that there is a level of observation, things that we can attain with our smell, sight, hearing, sense, and taste. And there is a level beneath or beyond that that we cannot reach with our senses. That's the level of theory in science. That's the level of something beyond in religion. But this very division between observation and theory, or observation and faith, makes it possible to create science. And science was created in the Western world. It was not created in Asia, Africa, Native Americans, because they had a more holistic view on nature. So this is not something that Western religions invented in order to attain science, but it is a precondition, I think, for the scientific thinking. In the Middle Ages, there were some religious issues that were hotly debated within the Catholic Church. The question of substance and surface, the question of universals and particulars, which led to a development of logic that still today is considered as one of the great leaps in the history of logic and philosophy. This formed a basis for the scientific revolution a century, 2 centuries later, where, as Galileo said, that the language of nature is mathematics, and the scientists of the scientific revolution relied on a conceptual language, if you so may, that was developed for purely religious reasons. The third reason that science was very much helped by the Catholic Church was the institutions. The universities, the monasteries were very much interested in investigating nature, not motivated by scientific ideals in any which way, motivated by the idea that God created universe, and in order to get to know God, we have to know nature. understand nature, because that is the traces of God's intent with his creation. So it's a religious motivation, but it leads to a scientific endeavor. And from this, the Catholic Church has as one of its dogmas that if science reaches something that is proven true, it is never a problem for the Catholic Church or religion, because truth cannot contradict truth. It can be expressed in different ways, but if two statements are made about the same subject, the same topic, and they're both true, then they can't be in conflict with each other. So that's a philosophical basis for why the Catholic Church commits to admit and encourage good science. The Catholic Church wants more science, not less. For religious reasons, granted, but nonetheless, there is no conflict. So that's pretty much my position, and it was probably 5 minutes or more.
Okay, thank you very much. This was very elucidating. And I will be leaving the floor to Stephen, but could I just shortly ask, sorry, Lawrence.
Doesn't matter. I'll go by whatever name you want.
Just seems like something.
My name in Swedish is Stephen, actually, so it's okay.
Well then. No, I'm very sorry. Lawrence, of course. But let me just put a brief question first to Roland. Do I understand you correctly that you adhere basically to the views of Stephen Jay Gould, that religion and science are non-overlapping magisteria, that they are separate domains?
No, I think that religion pulls in the same way as science.
Okay.
I think that religion is good for science, not that there are parallel tracks.
Okay, thank you for that distinction. I think the idea of or the question of the role of religion in the rise of science, which you touched upon, is also a very interesting one. So I would ask Lawrence to comment on that as well. Please.
You want me to start? Okay. I'm going to stand up because I just flew in and arrived a few hours ago. So if I nod off, you'll just kick me. I didn't have much. This is still too loud. Oh, it's Roland. You're breathing.
Shall I stop?
Stop breathing and we'll be fine. Okay. I didn't prepare a lot because A, I'm tired, and B, I didn't think there was much to talk about. The answer to is religion compatible with science is clearly no. We could just go home. In the sense that the doctrines of the world's organized religions are incompatible with science. Every specific doctrine is known to be incompatible with the results of empirical evidence. I'm pleased to see the Catholic Church is progressing to want to agree with things, in which case they would agree that virgins don't give birth, that you don't bring people back from the dead, and if you want to go back further, the earth didn't stand still when you blew a trumpet, and lots of other aspects of doctrine. Now, most people who are practicing Catholics or otherwise, who are sensible, and I'll put you in that category.
Just you wait.
Just wait, okay, for the moment. What they do is, what people like religion. That's what people like. They like religion. Why do they like religion? Because they like to feel like they're good people. In fact, my friend Richard Dawkins' foundation ran a census in England of the people. Last census in England asked religion, and for the very first time, only slightly more than 50% of the people in England declared themselves to be affiliated with the Church of England. 53%, which is great. It's going down. But they asked those people why they declared themselves, and they said, "Do you believe in transubstantiation? Do you believe in the virgin birth? Do you believe in this?" And the answer was no, 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 no. And they said, "Why are you religious?" And the answer was, "I like to think of myself as a good person," because religion has usurped that notion of morality. But clearly, the only way religion can be consistent with science is to get rid of all the doctrines on which religion is based. Now, the only kind of religion that could be consistent with science is some vague deism, some kind of notion that there may be purpose or meaning to the universe, vaguely. That's consistent because it's not disprovable in a general sense. First, to that one can say, first of all, there's no evidence of purpose or meaning to the universe. So you can't disprove that that is the case, but there's certainly no evidence of it in science. But more importantly, the real thing is, does it add anything? And the answer is it does nothing. Sure, you can add that, but it doesn't add anything to our understanding of nature. It doesn't add anything to our notions of morality or ethics, which all come from reason. You certainly wouldn't want to base your morality on anything like the Bible, which is probably one of the more immoral books ever written. It's obscene. And that includes both testaments, as far as I'm concerned. No one talked more about hell and eternal punishment than Jesus. Basically, that's my central point, that the doctrines of religion are inconsistent with science, and you can feel free to believe in a creator or some purpose to the universe, but it just doesn't add anything. And moreover, it's completely redundant because as science has demonstrated, there's absolutely no need for anything supernatural. You can get a universe from nothing, but you can get, the way the universe works is incredibly interesting. In fact, it's spiritual. In fact, the spirituality of science is so much more exciting than the spirituality of religion, and the reason is it's real. Now, it is true, it is absolutely true that science in the Western world owes its existence to the church, historically. Big deal. It's a historical fact. First of all, the church was the only seat of power and money, and therefore education, from medieval times, even before medieval times onward. So it was if you wanted to study science, you had to go to a university which had to be supported by the church because it was the only seat of power and money. So the fact that there's this early connection between the origins of science and religion is historical, interesting, but doesn't say anything about science. Moreover, the wonderful thing about children is they grow up. So the church is the mother of science. But the great thing about children is they grow up, and the even better thing for some children is they leave home. Parents here who are in that situation parents here who aren't in that situation will bemoan the fact that some children don't leave home. But science originated in the only form of education there was, but it grew up. And then the questions that science asked progressed. The questions that religion asked didn't progress. Because the difference between science and religion is that we don't assume the answers before we ask the questions. We let nature tell us the answers. Now, the claim that it is an absolutely true statement that science and religion coexist because there are scientists who are religious. What does that tell us? That tells us that scientists are human. 40%. It may be that in various surveys, 40% of some scientists claim to believe in some God. In the most elite members of the scientific community, it's much less. In the National Academy of Sciences in the United States, it's less than 10%. But it really doesn't matter. There are actually some scientists who are Republicans. Probably fewer now than there were a year ago. But all it demonstrates is the fact that humans have a capacity for believing two completely mutually inconsistent things at the same time. That's part of being human. We're not fully rational beings. Reason is a slave of passion in that regard. And so the fact that there's some scientists who are child molesters doesn't mean that that's compatible with science either. Those scientists may be priests. But anyway, it is absolutely true that science and religion don't make similar claims about the natural world. Because the scientific claims are right, the religious claims are wrong. They can't be similar. So religion is certainly, and in fact, as St. Augustine would point out and others, is certainly not, the Bible is not to be read as a book of science. It's a mistake to believe it should be read that way because after all, it was written before people knew the earth went around the sun. And while it is true that Galileo is celebrated now, we must remember that the church wasn't particularly interested in his science when they excommunicated him. So the idea is that there are theologians, and any sensible theologian must accept the universe for the way it is, and they try and it's called apologetics for a reason, to try and make the religious theology consistent with what we know, and what we know is constantly changing. But what we know contradicts virtually everything in the doctrines of the world's organized religions. So as I say, the only thing you have left is to say there's some vague purpose to the universe. And if you want to believe that, that's fine, but that doesn't add anything. And it's certainly not the basis of science. It's not the basis of morality. And it's just a fairy tale. Thank you.
Thank you for that. You were saying that religion adds nothing in this world, basically.
Well, there was some good music on the basis of religion that was written.
Sorry?
But, I mean, religion was a source of some good music, some good poetry. The Bible has some sex scenes in it and some interesting violence as well. Yeah.
But what about people's experience of being consoled, finding meaning and joy, etc., in a religious faith? I mean, don't you think that faith can meet a demand that is difficult to meet within a totally secular context?
Oh, well, if you ask, does religion have an excuse for existence? Obviously, it's ubiquitous. Pretty well all the world's cultures have religions. Religion clearly fulfills, at this point, some kind of evolutionary, cultural evolutionary niche that humans are evolved for teleology. Humans evolved to find purpose in things. Good reason for that. It's if the leaves are rustling in Africa, you can assume there's no purpose to that, or you can assume there might be a lion behind it. Those people that assumed there was purpose survived and reproduced. And so humans like to find purpose in things. And often, because the world is violent and unfair, find a need to hope that there's something better. And so religion certainly provides that, but that doesn't make it consistent with the world the way it is.
No, absolutely. That's
The question is, can you find solace, joy, hope without religion? And of course, the answer is absolutely yes. I find the fact that the universe wasn't created for us, that doesn't care about what us and what we want or desire, to give me great solace. The fact that we're here for a short time and will be gone makes every moment more precious for me. So my joy, hope, spiritual wonderment, which comes from looking at a Hubble Space Telescope picture, comes from the rejection of everything that religion defines. So it's clear that religion offers a utility for people. The question is it the only way to get that? And the answer is no. And I would prefer to get my spiritual fulfillment for something that actually corresponds to reality. If other people find other needs, that's fine with me, but it doesn't make it intellectually consistent.
Thank you. Perhaps Roland would like to come back on the Catholic dogma. I mean, it's clear that the Church has abandoned a certain number of traditional beliefs that were inconsistent with science, but it still seems to cling to some of them. And could you comment, for example, on the faith in miracles, that is still prominent within the Church?
Yeah, that's faith.
That is faith, yes.
That is
well, the question
faith.
Is that compatible with a scientific worldview? That's why we're here.
No, and it's not supposed to be.
It's not supposed to be.
That is what it is to be religious, to believe in something supernatural.
So therefore it isn't compatible with science.
So it's not incompatible. It would be incompatible if it made some kind of universal claim. Science makes universal claims, and rightly so.
Well, actually, it's the opposite. Science doesn't make universal claims. Science constantly changes, which is the great thing about science. As I often say as a theoretical physicist, the two best states to be in are wrong and confused, because those mean there's something to learn. So science, by definition, evolves and changes in the face of evidence. I think that the Church makes universal claims. Anyway.
Obviously, the church makes universal claims, as does science. Scientific laws, approximate truth.
They're all approximate.
They cannot claim to represent the truth, and any good scientist would agree with that.
Yeah, that's why they're not universal. There's no scientific theory that universally applies to the whole universe on all scales.
But the claim is universal. The law of gravity supposedly has always been, will always be everywhere.
Which
it's
law
not,
of gravity?
Well, any. Newton, Einstein.
Okay, so
but the claim is that this is a scientific law that is applicable everywhere, always, and always will.
No, it's not a claim. In fact, some people claim that that gravity changes as a function of time, and I've written papers to demonstrate how we can test that. So the idea is, can we see if gravity's been the same over all time? Not making that claim as if it's written and irrevocable.
Yeah.
The question is to test it. And some people have argued, Dirac very famously, that gravity is weak because it changed over time. In fact, I and others have disproved that by looking at tests you can do from the universe. But I don't think there's any claims of universality. I think that's a really important difference, that science does not claim any universal truths, but religion does without any justification whatsoever.
So when you talk about a change in gravity, against what background? Just flipping a coin, or against some kind of scientific mechanism and laws? Why does it change? Just because it wants to? No, because of some kind of universal claim that lies behind this theory.
No, in fact, Dirac gave no argument why it might be the case, but he said it is an interesting way to try and explain some things we see. There was the answer was, and this is the wonderful thing about science, is we don't know. And the great thing about science is we are very pleased to say we don't know. That's another major difference between science and religion, and that's why science progresses and religion doesn't.
Well, religious people don't know. That's why we use the word faith. But again, I think we have to agree to disagree here. I claim that science makes universal claims against a background of knowledge that science evolves as far as the growth of knowledge. But there is the fundamental idea of science is that nature works in a certain way, and there are laws and forces that guide nature, and to get to those is the theoretical endeavor of science.
It's a fundamental assumption of science.
But obviously, science does not claim to make statements that happen to be true at certain times and not true at other times, true in some places and not true in other places.
Oh, certainly it does.
Certainly
absolutely.
Not.
Yeah, Newton's law of gravity is a perfect example. It's absolutely true for anything anyone is going to do in this room. You throw a baseball or soccer ball or whatever your favorite sport is towards any of us, and it'll be described by Newton's laws. But it's absolutely not true in regimes that are very small or very fast. So it's a beautiful law that is absolutely useful for calculating anything most people would need in their everyday lives, but it's absolutely not true in other circumstances. That's the amazing beauty of the scientific understanding is that scientific theories not only evolve, but as I said, are absolutely not universal. We know for a fact that even the best scientific theory we have, something called quantum electrodynamics, which right now allows us to calculate fundamental quantities like the properties of atoms to 11 decimal places based on fundamental principles and compare them with experiment. There's nowhere else in all of science or any human activity where you can do that. That's the best theory we have, and we know it's wrong. We know it's wrong at certain scales. So there's no theory that is right in all regimes. It's exactly the opposite of what you said.
So,
Roland, excuse me, could you please move your microphone a bit closer to your mouth so that?
Yeah, I moved it away when you're breathing.
Okay.
Just
What you just said, obviously, that we have learned that Newton's theory of gravity is not applicable under extreme circumstances. But against what background? Against a deeper understanding of the law and mechanisms that guide nature. So it's just begging the question. Then you can go back and say, look at Aristotle's universe. Obviously, that was not true. Hence, science is not making any universal claims. Aristotle made universal claims.
Well, Aristotle wasn't a scientist in the modern sense.
As did Newton, as did Einstein,
Aristotle
as did
also
quantum
claimed
physics, etc.
But there's a big difference. Aristotle claimed that women had
constantly striving towards revealing the forces, the mechanisms that guide nature, and it's inherently making universal claims. But you confuse that statement with that scientific knowledge is evolving, which is obviously true, and it will keep on evolving. But that is something else compared to saying that science inherently make universal claims. Well, I couldn't even understand what science would be if it didn't make universal claims.
No, look, I think you're confusing claims and assumptions. The point is that science is governed by empirical evidence. So you're right, we have to make assumptions in order to make progress. So we assume, for example, that there are laws that you can determine that describe the way the universe works. And then we go out and see if there are. And we test them. And they work. So that tells us that assumption is a reasonable one. But we continue to test to see if those laws are even constant in time. So the point is that science doesn't make claims, it makes assumptions. And those assumptions are tested. And nature determines what is true or false, not scientists. We don't get ordained. We get a PhD, but that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't give any authority. There are no scientific authorities. Authority is an anathema to science. Again, it's the difference in religion. Scientists are fallible. The Pope is infallible, but of course, just listen to the Pope, and you realize that that's a fallacy. And I must say, I'm very happy that the Pope is coming here to celebrate the 500th anniversary of the Pope being thrown out. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful irony. So there are no authorities. There's no statement in science that cannot be questioned by a beginning graduate student or a high school student or anyone. And that's the other feature. We don't need a set of doctrines which we all agree to. In fact, what scientists do on a daily basis is try and go out and prove their colleagues wrong. If you want to come here in December, the way you do it is by proving your colleagues wrong. You discover something new and exciting that changes our view of the universe. And so I see it as a totally different direction. Now, when you say faith, I understand. So miracles are an act of faith, but miracles don't happen. So that faith is misplaced. So what does that mean?
Well, first of all, science, you said, builds on empirical observation. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not true. Science builds on theoretical assumptions.
No,
you can't find one great theory of science that did not start with a theoretical, not corroborated, not a theoretical assumption without evidence. Oh, no, that is where it begins. And then you begin to see.
There are very few times where theory. I'm a theorist, and you can list on the fingers of less than two hands. I'm going to just hang up because someone in the States is calling me. The times where theory has preceded experiment. Everything, the theory of relativity, was based on, in fact, observations of electromagnetism and observations that Galileo had made. quantum mechanics was based on a paradox that came from experiment. Theorists are almost always behind the times. They're driven by experiment. And in fact, in the absence of experiment, theory flounders. That's part of the problem with particle physics, the field the basis of many of my studies, is the fact that we have been lacking empirical direction, and you find that theorists begin to hallucinate. And what we need is it's exactly the empirical evidence that forces the thinking of theorists. And there's very few times that, in fact, the example that I know of that's the most clear example of a theorist sort of leaping out was general relativity, Einstein's general relativity, which is an amazing work of engineering. But even that, ultimately, was based on empirical thinking. So, and in fact, again, since we're in Sweden, the Nobel Prizes in physics rightly go almost always to experimentalists. Now, I say this as someone who, a few years ago in 1995, proposed that there's this stuff called dark energy that dominates the universe. And it was very heretical, which is why I proposed it. And it was the only way to agree with the data. It was just crazy. 4 years later, some observers came up and discovered that was true. Who won the Nobel Prize for that? The observers. And that's fine. I think that's the right thing, because in fact, that was what drove. No one believed it when we said it, and it's the way it works. Observation is what determines things, not theory.
Gentlemen, could I interrupt you there for a second? I would like to ask.
I would like to just briefly answer or comment.
Please answer
on that.
briefly, and then I'll get back to my question.
The fact that the Nobel Prize often goes to experimental physicists obviously has nothing to do with whether theory comes first or whether empirical evidence for theory comes first. If a physicist is brilliant in proving a theoretical assumption, he or she is worthy of the Nobel Prize. It has nothing.
It happens every now and then.
Nothing logical to do with whether theory or empirical evidence come first or second. Secondly, yes, Galileo, especially Kepler and Brahe, were very instrumental in making it possible for Newton to come up with his laws. And I have actually 2 lengthy chapters in a book I wrote on the history of science, where I make the claim that engineers and experimentalists are vastly underestimated in the development of scientific theory. So I absolutely give you that. Nonetheless, when Newton comes up with his laws, he's laughed at because it is considered some kind of weird magic in many quarters. How could Earth keep the moon in orbit around itself without some kind of physical rope keeping it close to Earth? It was like some kind of magic assumption.
Well, he was laughed at and became president of the Royal Society.
If we go further to Einstein, when Einstein supersedes classical physics, he is considered at the outset of his career rather as a successor to the great German philosophical system builders like Hegel. And he's not awarded the Nobel Prize for his theory of relativity.
Well, that was anti-Semitism at work, but that's a different...
Well, history of science says something else. But what history of science says is that he's not awarded the prize for his theory of relativity because it's considered metaphysical, it's considered philosophy, and it takes till, I think, 1921 because there are observations that seems to confirm that light bends around the sun.
1919.
So that is 2 examples, Newton and Einstein, where theory comes first and then empirical evidence confirms.
Gentlemen, I'm sorry. I think that was a brief comment, actually.
Okay.
So, of course, Lawrence, you're free to comment on this as well, but I'd like to take a slightly different approach on the theme now. And I'm wondering, Now, Lawrence, if you look at this domain of conflict between religion and science of today, which to you is apparent, what do you believe to be the greatest clash or the most worrisome kind of conflict that we see in today's world in terms of implications for society or politics?
Well, look, a friend of mine, Noam Chomsky, said to me once that he doesn't care what people believe, it's what they do that matters, and that's true. The problem is what you believe affects what you do. If every person was an island and didn't have an impact, it wasn't a parent or a teacher or have influence of others, I wouldn't care what people believed. But the real problem is when, look, and one of the reasons that we distrust theory in physics is that revelation is always wrong. There's never been an example where revelation has been right, and revelation is almost always wrong because human intuition, in many ways, is generally, when it comes to the universe, wrong. And again, for evolutionary reasons. So the problem is when people take precepts based on things that are clearly wrong, doctrines that are clearly wrong. Say, for example, that homosexuality is evil. A precept written in a book by that codified the beliefs of illiterate peasants in the Iron Age, and somehow we're supposed to use it as a basis of morality today. Well, it isn't. It's just an empirical fact that not only is it not unnatural, it's not evil. It's not unnatural. If you take, for example, sheep, 10% of sheep have long-term homosexual relationships. They don't even have a soul to go to hell. So it's certainly not unnatural. And so the problem is that the real problem is when people take beliefs that are clearly based on things which are incompatible with reality, not only believe them themselves, but try and enforce them upon others. And so you see it everywhere. I certainly see it in my country, where people view religious freedom as the right to impose their beliefs on other people. And that is just obviously an oxymoron. And to me, I think that's that and the fact that religion is associated with morality are the two biggest problems. That people seem to feel they need religion to have morality, and if you don't have religion, you are immoral. And in this country, that just means people can say bad things about you, but in other countries, it means you'll be killed. It is perhaps, in my mind, the worst part of religion. If we could just take back morality and equate that with rational humanism, then religion would be impotent, and then it would be fine if people believed the fairy tales they believed.
Thank you. I believe Roland would like to comment on that.
Yeah, as far as homosexuality, the Nazis, the communists killed them off in Sweden. It was illegal in positivistic, socialistic Sweden. It was illegal when I was a teenager. I think that that is very much a cultural phenomenon,
where does
more
culture
than a
come
religious.
from? As you just said, religion.
In interaction with religion, in interaction with art, in interaction with philosophy, in interaction with science? Or is it your opinion that culture comes from religion only?
Well, I think you just said the basis of the Western philosophical basis comes out of religious backgrounds, and that's pervasive and long-lasting. And you're absolutely right that distrust of homosexuality has persisted in many. I mean, in many places where religion it wasn't manifest, but its origins, after all, come from the Bible. At least in the West, they come from the Quran and in other parts of the world and other religions, other things. So I think you would agree that the basis of, because religion was so pervasive in Western intellectual thought, that it has long fingers, and those persist today in many areas of human thought.
I'm not disagreeing with that. The discrimination of homosexuals has philosophical roots.
Yeah, and they're not in science.
I would be a dunce if I did. But what I'm saying is that, for instance, communism was trying to cleanse its population by killing off homosexuals.
What's that got to do with anything?
Communism was anti-religion. So what I'm saying is that we find several roots to anti-gay sentiments.
But communism was also anti-science.
And maybe those several roots have a common root.
Yeah, but the fact that communism in its form as manifested in the Soviet Union at the time was anti-religion is true. But science in the Soviet Union was held back, not just for many reasons in the Soviet Union, because it also was any regime that stifles open questioning, and that includes the church or communism or any authoritarian regime, is anti-science.
Obviously. Was something else that you said here I wanted to comment on. Yeah, well, it actually goes to what you just said, any regime that is not open. And you were talking about science as being inherently always striving to disprove itself in order to reach deeper knowledge.
Yeah.
Well, there is one school within the theory of science that is called the sociology of science. And if you study scientific communities, you will find that your notion of the rational humanist is a pipe dream. Within the scientific community, it has always been as irrational as far as accepting new theories as in any other communities. And to make a different claim is basically not to say that science is a better outlook on nature. It's to say that scientists is a different breed of human beings.
No. You're confusing scientists and
I'm
science.
not confusing anything.
No.
We might disagree, but I'm not
you're confusing scientists and science. Scientists are human, which is, for many people, a surprise. Scientists are human, and therefore there are, of course, fads, rivalries, jealousies, all the things. Scientific enterprise is a human enterprise just like any other human enterprise, and it's full of the same good things and bad things. But what's great is the scientific method is based on, in fact, recognizing those human inadequacies and irrationalities and finding a way to progress through them. So science progresses by fads and some people who are viewed as scientific authorities, etc. But what's great is the science overcomes that eventually. The scientific method, empirical evidence, testing, retesting, is based on the recognition that we all want to believe, and therefore we should be distrusted. So scientists, absolutely, the sociology of science is replete with examples of good ideas that were suppressed or not accepted or not believed or whatever for the most ridiculous reasons. But we know about it after the fact. The fact that we know about it after the fact demonstrates the fact that the science is successful, because eventually those ideas became the ones that we accept scientifically because they worked. And that's ultimately what happens in science. It rises above the level of humans because it recognizes that scientists are human.
There's an interesting distinction you make between science and scientists. Mm-hmm. What is science if not the accumulation of scientists making scientific work?
Over the long term, that's exactly what it is. But that doesn't mean it's true over the short term.
No, but you make a distinction here. You say you have to make a distinction between scientists and science. So I want to know, where does science, if we that it follows logically that if you take away all scientists, you still have science.
Well,
where does it exist? Are you a Platonist?
No. Okay. Look, I mean, you can ask philosophical questions, but I want to ask.
Well, this is a philosophical
Well, I don't want to make.
discussion.
I want to deal with questions that relate to reality. So, scientists. Take for example string theory. Okay, string theory is an area which in the 1980s and 1990s occupied the attention of a huge fraction of the scientific community. It had great scientific. It had a great scientific following. It hasn't. If you look, I think if historians in the future look and say, has it yet justified any of the excitement, or much of the excitement in the 1980s and 1990s, you find out the answer is no. It was a sociological phenomenon, but it's a blip. The point is the science progresses, and what's happened is the minute a new discovery is made at the Large Hadron Collider, you saw it happen. It's like rats leaving a sinking ship. The minute there's new data, scientists rush to try and understand the world as it is. When there isn't data, they start intellectually masturbating. And so, fine. Scientists progress, as I say, the scientific enterprise progresses in the long term, in spite of the fact that scientists are human.
You said, I want to talk about reality. So I want to ask you one more time. Mm-hmm. You make a distinction between science and scientists. I presume that you do not make a distinction between what exists and what does not exist. I presume that you're making a distinction between two things that exist.
My distinction between science and scientists is the same.
Where does science exist? If we kill off all scientists in the universe, if you make a distinction by the two, we would still have science. Where is it?
Science is
my point with this, let me just, before you answer, my point with this is not to make some kind of Platonic, philosophical, scholastic argument. My point is to bring home the point that science is inherently a human endeavor, and because of this, it inherently carries with it all the human weaknesses all the time.
Well, science is a human endeavor. Science is what scientists do over time. Now, but that doesn't mean, but the fact that science overcomes, that the history of science is replete with examples of red herrings that have been occupied a lot of people for a long time and then are later discarded, is the beauty of science. It's like saying that the church is separate from priests. Well, you don't want to. Most people would not want to identify the Catholic Church with many priests, because there are many priests who have acted reprehensibly. Does that mean? Does that condemn the whole notion of the church? No, it says that the priests are human, and you don't allow them to have sex. They're going to find a way to have it one way or another, and it's just the way it is. And so the fact is that science is done by scientists, and scientists are human. But the scientific enterprise progresses because it does not rely on human intuition, human desire, human weakness. It relies on what works, and what works survives, and what doesn't work goes out like yesterday's newspaper. It's just the way. That's what's so wonderful about it.
Science, maybe one of the greatest philosophers of science was the late atheist liberal Karl Popper, who said that one, maybe the most important input to science is intuition. I think if you go back in time, you will find a vast number of great scientific leaps being based on intuition. Yeah, it's not being based on somebody going out and watching a simple fact and say, yay. It's being based on intuitive leaps by scientific geniuses.
Well, first of all, you build up scientific intuition. The reason we train students in science and force them to do these incredibly boring problems that turn most people off science is to try and build up some intuition so that later on your intuition may be reliable. So that's the first thing. But the most important part of science is that we also don't trust scientific intuition. So that some people have better intuition than others, and sometimes you're right and sometimes you're wrong. Einstein had great scientific intuition for a little while. Then his scientific intuition got crappy. It happens to most scientists. If they're lucky, they resonate with nature for a little while, and then it moves on. And so absolutely we try and develop scientific intuition which often means overcoming normal intuition, because our myopic view of reality is usually wrong. But we distrust it, and that's the real key. We distrust it because we say, okay, prove it. In fact, prove it wrong. And prove it, and as Feynman said, scientists not only try and prove themselves right when they have a good idea based on intuition, the good scientists try and prove themselves wrong. And that's the hardest part of science.
Historically, it's not true that the great scientists, those that really moved science forward, did it after having built up intuition. Typically, they do it at a young age.
Well,
so it's some kind of intuition that is really inexplicable from some kind of empirical or psychological point of view. By that, I don't mean that it's some kind of religious insight. I'm just saying that most great scientists, they come up with their intuitive leaps at a young age.
Well, not when they're 15, when they're 25.
Einstein was a child when he thought of how would it be if I was on my bike trying to raise a ray of light.
Well, he wasn't a child. He was 16. But the point is
definition of a child.
Well, but the point is, he actually thought about it because he'd studied Maxwell. The point is, he'd actually built up intuition because if Maxwell hadn't existed before Einstein, Einstein wouldn't have had those questions. And so Einstein studied, and by the time he was 16, already begun to understand electromagnetism in ways that other people had not. And it is true that it's done often by young people, especially theory. But we build up, hopefully, the purpose of education is to build up that kind of questioning, that kind of skepticism, to understand the process of science. You don't need a lot of facts. The facts come over the years as you learn more and more. But that's not important in science. That's not important in education. To me, that's the real problem of most public education. We think we have to fill people's heads with facts, but this will give them facts and misfacts if they want it. What we really need is to teach kids how to question, think, and know how to distinguish fact from fallacy. And that kind of intuition can be developed at an early age.
Well, Maxwell is another great example of an intuitive leap. And
no, Maxwell based his results on Faraday, which we admire tremendously, who died the year that Maxwell developed his final theory.
Yeah,
Maxwell revered Faraday. It's Faraday's experiments. I just wrote a book about it. That are the basis of Maxwell's results.
Granted, but I think we can both agree that when Maxwell presented his equations, it was a revelation to the scientific community. And I do not, absolutely not, want to make some kind of claim that there is something spiritual or religious or anything going on here. But to Maxwell himself, this was such a profound experience that he expressed it in religious terms.
But do you know why it was profound? It wasn't profound because the equations are beautiful. By the way, they were kind of ugly the way Maxwell framed them. Now, when you have them on your T-shirt, we've refined them so they fit on a T-shirt. But the reason that he found them so amazing, it's the same thing that caused Einstein palpitations when he developed general relativity. It wasn't the beauty of the mathematics. Maxwell, and the most beautiful calculation you can do as an undergraduate, Maxwell showed that when you put these things together, you discovered electromagnetic waves moved, and you could calculate from first principles what their speed was, and what did it work out to be? The speed of light. And you could, and which had been empirically measured. That was what was so beautiful. Suddenly, he saw by comparing his theory to an experiment that light was an electromagnetic wave. It wasn't the intrinsic beauty of that. What made Einstein thrilled about general relativity wasn't the beauty of the mathematical beauty of Riemannian geometry. It was the fact that the precession of Mercury, which had been known for a long time and unexplained, agreed exactly with his predictions. That's what made each of them so amazed. And it is amazing if you're a theorist. It is an amazing experience and a terrifying one. If you look at your equations on paper that you may have developed in the middle of the night, and think that nature actually might obey them and discover that it does. It's amazing and terrifying at the same time. But it's only by comparing to the real world, nothing to do with intrinsically the thoughts or beauty or elegance of the mathematics.
Again, that is, I'm not a physicist, obviously. I did give a talk once to the Nobel Committee on Einstein, not really from a scientific point of view, but more from a history of science point of view. And Einstein was driven obsessively by creating a beautiful theory, which is the very reason that he could never accept quantum physics. And Einstein is on record saying that the true theory of physics is the most simple, most beautiful mathematical theory. So to say that Einstein was not driven by the simplicity and the beauty of the theory is historically false.
Of course, I mean, scientists are driven by many things, okay? But what makes the distinction between, if Einstein was driven by beautiful theories and never did anything, you wouldn't be quoting him. The reason that we quote Einstein is not because of what he said, it's because of what he did. And what he did was happen to discover a theory that described nature. And that was what makes it significant. Of course, he was driven by beauty and simplicity, which is why, in his view, quantum mechanics was wrong, and which is why we don't study Einstein's paper discussions of quantum mechanics, except for the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox, which drives much of modern quantum mechanics in that sense, because he was wrong. So what's really important is whatever drove him, when it worked, we celebrate it. When it didn't work, we don't celebrate it. And Einstein, for the last part of his life, was completely out of touch with physics because he became out of touch with experiment. He was beautifully in touch with the phenomena of physics at the time of development of electromagnetism, and even, of course, at the development of atomic physics, which is what he won the Nobel Prize for. When he lost touch with what was going on in the empirical world, Einstein became, I was going to say a philosopher, but I won't say that way. Einstein became an old man. That happens.
Well, that would be when he had built up the most of his intuition then.
No,
So
I told you he built up his intuition. I told you he built
it's
up
not
his
a matter of building up intuition. It's some kind of conceptual leap that cannot be explained by starting out with gathering a lot of empirical evidence until you suddenly sees how everything hangs together. That is simply not how
What I said was Einstein, all scientists have intuition. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. For the great scientists, they're lucky if for a little while the intuition matches reality. And so for Einstein, it matched for over an incredible number of areas over a period of about 20 years. An amazing experience. But eventually, intuition goes wrong. And with Einstein, that happened.
I think now that Roland would like to draw something for us.
I suspect so.
Hopefully. When you've done that, then maybe we could open the floor for the audience's questions. Is that okay?
This is how conventionally, according to the majority of philosophers of science develops. You have a theoretical level, and you have an empirical level. Somebody comes up with an idea here, and now it has to be tested. It's not unusual that it can't be tested, because the method for making the experiment is not there. So now people start to work here. That was the case with Einstein, obviously. Now they start to work here. How can we test it? And then they test it, and it's falsified, or it's I'm trying to say this, corroborated. Corroborated. Mm-hmm. And if it is, then we start to believe it a little bit more. And we make more experiments. And eventually, we reach a point where we decide that this is true. Scientists don't believe that it's true. But they settle on this level with this theory. And then eventually there will be found anomalies to that theory, and then somebody will come up with something here, and now it's time to test that. So the notion that science starts with building observations that give rise to some kind of intuition, and then we go down here, it's simply historically false. Having said that, this level is vastly underestimated in the history of science. I absolutely agree with that. But the structure of scientific progress is it starts out with theoretical leaps that then will be tested. As far as Einstein, driven by beauty, and that not being significant, of course it's significant.
Well,
that is the very assumption of science, that universe and nature has an order, which we could call
the assumption of
beauty.
science is that nature has an order which we can try and explore by experiment and theory. Look, we should get to the audience, but I'll just say one thing. I think you're too influenced by Einstein. The point is that take gravity, take Kepler and Brahe, who were based on observation and discovered ellipses, that the planets worked in move in elliptical orbits ultimately, which was the basis of Newtonian gravity. Take quantum mechanics, where it was discovered not just that there was that ovens produce light that is inconsistent with all theory at the time, but in fact when you shine light on metals that there's inconsistency. In every area I know, what happens is there are empirical paradoxes that drive the thinking of scientists, and when scientists divorce their theories from experiments that happened before, you find that's the problem. But in any case, none of this relates to the compatibility of science and religion, but there is a healthy relationship between empiricism, empirical evidence and theory, and whether and how you want to frame it, I think, is irrelevant to the question.
Yeah, well, Brahe, he basically was only an experimentalist. So, he had some kind of theory of the solar system that was pretty much far out there. As far as Kepler, he
was on a Danish island that eventually became a Swedish island. I've been there, the island of Ven, because
I've been there too.
Roland,
Kepler made the same conceptual leap that I attribute to Einstein, for instance.
Okay, I will be drawing the line here for now, and opening up for questions from the audience. And what we will do is, okay, a number of hands in the air, very good. Ulf, could you? So please phrase your questions in English. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, I can translate.
Okay, I have a question for Roland, but I'd like a comment also from Lawrence after you answered. Lawrence said something like, miracles is not compatible with science, and then you said, well, that's why we call it faith in miracles. Mm-hmm. And I want to know what you mean by that exactly, because if you mean by that you have hope that miracles should happen, then I would agree with you, because you can hope for anything, basically. It doesn't have to relate to reality. But if you mean by that you think that miracles actually happen, then it's a ontological cognitive claim of truth, basically, and that is obviously not compatible with science. So do you mean that you believe in miracles even though you know that they don't happen, or what do you mean?
Well, first of all, I agree with Lawrence that we kind of left the topic there for a while, so that it's good you ask that question so we can get back to it. What I mean by that statement is that science, which Lawrence disagrees with when I make the statement, and I still stand by it, science makes, rightly so, universal claims. It tries to find the laws that guide nature. And at every point, scientists hope that they found it or them. But they also know that it's quite unlikely that they're approximating truth. Nonetheless, the claim is universal. Now, miracles, from a religious perspective then, does not make the claim to enter into the realm of science. The claim is that science is what explains nature, and that is very good, and it should carry on. And the more we understand from a scientific point of view, the merrier. That is what we are as human beings. Miracles are thought of by definition as something extra or supernatural, whether you believe in them or not. That's a separate issue. But it's to say that a miracle happened is not to make a claim that is in any which way relevant for the scientific project.
Well, let me just comment on that, because claiming a miracle happened is an empirical statement. Mm-hmm. It's therefore subject to scientific investigation, as all empirical statements are. So either it happened or it didn't happen.
Yep.
Empirically. And of course, the church claims miracles happen. There's no evidence that any miracle has ever happened. The church needs to do it. When it wanted to make that awful woman, Mother Teresa, a saint, it had to find some miracles that awful woman had somehow been responsible for. And so it found some miracles, which would not pass the test of a court of law, much less a scientific investigation. So it's a perfect example of the incompatibility. It's a claim about the empirical world. To claim miracles happen is a claim about the empirical world, and they're therefore subject to scientific investigation. Scientific investigation has thus far demonstrated that no miracles have ever happened.
Well, we have a non-reflexive relation here in the sense that I am pro-science and you are anti-religion, which is reflected in how you speak of child molesting priests and the awful woman, Mother Teresa.
I'm against the doctrines of religion. It depends what you mean. I'm not opposed, as I said, I'm not opposed to the idea that people may have, that there's order, meaning, purpose to the universe. I think it's probably incorrect, but I'm not opposed to that idea, nor do I think it's evil.
And the Bible being the most appalling book ever written.
Well, it is. That's empirical.
Well, I could probably present you with Mein Kampf and some other books that are more difficult to side with than with the Bible. Nonetheless, I'm a Catholic. We do not read the Bible literally.
Absolutely. Why? Because it's evil.
No, because...
Okay. Yeah.
So I think that I must be allowed to address this. No, because the Catholic Church believes that human beings wrote the Bible, human beings are imperfect, as opposed to, for instance, Islam, where they believe that the Quran is actually words of God and not human beings.
Absolutely. Because
so, of course, the Bible will reflect the weaknesses of human beings.
That's the church now. That wasn't the church in the 12th century or something.
No,
but that's okay.
We're here now,
600 years. The Quran is 600 years later, so it's just a little bit behind. But you're absolutely right. Now that the
science 50 years ago wanted to sterilize people in order to cleanse our race. We're here now. We're not talking about
the main
what
difference
happened.
between the Judeo-Christian religion and Islam right now is exactly the point you make, is that somehow every word of the Quran is taken to be absolutely true, whereas no one who except for maybe Ken Ham in my country and a few other people, think that, and maybe a lot of the Republican Party, think that would take the Bible literally true. So no one would say, yes, we'll stone our children if they disobey. If it's in there in the Bible, let's kill them. It's just not the way it's done that way. You're right. The church, because it's older, it's progressed and realized that many of the admonitions
that
in the
is
Bible
also
are wrong.
Historically incorrect. If you go back to the church fathers during the 5th and 6th century, there are very profound discussions about how to interpret the Bible.
Of course
the Catholic Church has never been literalist, going back to its very foundations. It's not a matter of Islam being 600 years behind. It's a matter of different views on the relationship between
they were literalist enough during the Crusades to do exactly what Islam is now saying, that if you don't believe in that religion, you should be killed.
Again, if you go back to the Crusades,
Okay.
Science are trying to find solutions for a number of very important problems, and for example, climate change and cancer. What could religion possibly add to the progress of those fields?
Nothing. Of course, religion is not involved in trying to find a cure for cancer, but religion could be something for people to hang on to maybe when they are sick with cancer, as I am, for instance. It can be supportive from a personal, spiritual point of view, but it's the scientific endeavor and the scientists' task, as it were, to find a cure for cancer. Religion would never make that claim unless you go to nature religions where they dig down a stone under the big oak at midnight when the moon is full. But developed religions are not making any claims towards finding cures for illnesses or anything like that.
Let me take a position which you may find unusual, because I'm going to say that religion can do something in principle, in the sense that there are religious authorities, and what they say, people tend to follow. So, for example, a lot of people praised the current Pope when he came out with an encyclical about climate change. So, in principle, he could have a positive effect on the world, in principle, by pointing out that this is a problem that the church, of which he is the leader, takes seriously. So the church can do things that benefit, and there have been examples where it has, and many examples where it hasn't. And so it can have a positive effect because people obey or people listen to those authorities. In terms of developing the knowledge of climate change or the knowledge of cancer or anything else, of course the church and theology can't do anything about that. There's no knowledge has been developed by theology in the last 500 years. But the
there
church
was
can,
the Big Bang Theory.
it was developed by a Belgian priest who happened to be a physicist. He didn't do it by looking at the Bible. But anyway, so the point is that the church can have a positive impact, but only because people listen to it. But that doesn't mean, but the problem is, of course, it's a double-edged sword. As you can say, the church can have a negative impact because people listen to it.
I totally agree with that, but and it's maybe more the church worldly powers, as it were, rather than its religious authority. In the same way.
Well, it has worldly powers because of its religious authority.
Yeah, but the religious authority can be used for good and for bad in worldly circumstances.
Absolutely.
As far as the Big Bang Theory being formulated by a Catholic priest, that was against his background belief that there was a creation moment for a universe. So
no, it was developed because he did a PhD at MIT.
Yeah, but you can't separate his faith from his theoretical finds.
Read a scientific paper and look for one bit of religion in it. You won't find any.
No, but
okay.
Could
the question,
it seems so, huh?
The question is, given morality is a controversial issue, is there a way to ground morality in science?
Well, yeah, I think so. In the sense, first of all, I'm big on ethics. I don't know much about morality. It's because it's a very social phenomenon. But the point is that I would argue you can't have morality without science. Okay, for the following reason: you can't have morality to know the consequences of your actions, and then you decide upon the consequences of your actions. You can't determine the consequences of your actions without science. Okay, we all do that. It's even at some basic level, that's what we do. We decide what the consequences will be based on the evidence that we've experienced throughout our lives. If we kill someone, we recognize what that means empirically. So I would argue that the basis of any morality has to be scientific, in the sense that science is rational thought based on empirical evidence. The rational processing of empirical evidence. That's how I define science. And then then we have to make decisions. And if you look, again, empirically, it seems to me that many people think you can't have morality without religion. However, I would argue that, in fact, our morality is not based on religion whatsoever. I have asked this, and only in one case in a certain audience did people disagree. So if you stop believing in God, would you go and kill your neighbor? Most people say no. Well, there obviously is another reason they wouldn't kill their neighbor. It's got nothing to do with their religious belief. And as my friend Steven Pinker would say, ultimately, let's say God decided killing was okay. How would God decide that? Okay? Well, if by some reasoning of some sort, well, if that's, just get rid of the middleman. Just go directly to the reasoning. You don't need the God for any of it.
Well, the thought that science is necessary for morality because science provides empirical evidence for the consequences of your actions is, again, something that confuses science with something else. Empirical evidence is not per se science.
The rational
we all have
processes.
Yeah, the rational conclusions of empirical input is not science. Science is something more than that.
What?
Science is something that provides a theoretical basis for the empirical evidence and its consequences.
That's rational process.
There is, yeah, but rationality and science are not in any which way the same thing. Of course, you can be rational and find out the consequences of your actions based on empirical evidence without basing it in science.
That's what I call science.
To claim that science is necessary for morality is ludicrous. That means that anybody who is not versed in science had to be an amoral person.
Science is a process. We all can do it or not do it. I refuse to accept a dichotomy between scientists. All of us do science from the time we're children. That's how we learn. Kids put their hands in flames and discover it's hot. That's what makes us grow up and learn how to deal with the world. And one of the things I fight the most is the notion that somehow science should be the domain of scientists. The scientific process should be applied broadly to our public policy and the way we live because it's useful and it works and it enhances our lives. But it's not the domain of a small group of people with hoods.
Are chimpanzees scientific?
Sometimes.
No, they're not. They get empirical input. They see the consequences of their actions in relation to the empirical input, and they change their behavior. There's nothing. A baby that is 8 months old will do that.
That's what's so great about science.
To say that
Even
is science, your scope of what science is totally everything is science. If I
except religion,
throw an egg. If I throw an egg on the floor and it breaks, that's not a scientific experiment.
Oh, sure it is. They do it in public schools.
Of course not.
Yeah, no, you can do a lot with that. It's a great scientific experiment. In fact, you want to do a really neat scientific experiment? Take an egg and find beautifully lush grass and throw it up as high as you can and watch it bounce. It won't break. It's a beautiful experiment. Do it.
Yeah, it is empirical evidence that will teach you something.
Yeah.
But it's not science. You know where science kicks in?
No, it is science.
No, it's not. Where science kicks in is when you ask yourself, why is that?
Of course.
That is where science. But
and then I make predictions about the future, but it's the basis of science.
What you're talking about is just stimulus and reaction.
No, it's rational thought applied to it, saying, okay, I put my hand in a flame, it burns. Okay, can I generalize based on that?
That is where science comes in.
Okay, well, that's what babies can do.
When you ask why.
Babies generalize based on that, and so do chimpanzees.
Yeah, but they do not. I mean, theory is Greek for insight.
Well, it's Greek to me.
It's Greek to everybody.
Okay,
theory is a Greek word
okay,
for
but it's
insight.
words. I don't care about the words.
No, I
Not to totally agree on this one.
But
Hi, Roland, at the beginning of the evening you explained why you felt that, for you personally, science and religion were compatible, and that also increased scientific knowledge actually strengthened your faith. And I'm really interested in that, particularly with relation to Catholicism. Firstly, because that's the complete opposite of my experience with Catholicism. It certainly did not strengthen my faith. But also because the Catholic Church is often held up as a good example of how these two things can coexist, since, as you point out, it doesn't treat the Bible as factual, it accepts evolution. But how far can that go before it actually negates the faith and just ceases to have any meaning? Because, for example, if you look at evolution, it's very nice to accept that, and, you know, because you should, because it's true, and it certainly makes you sound more rational and intelligent and credible. But if you take away that and you treat the Genesis account as completely non-factual, then you no longer have the fall of man, you no longer have original sin, you no longer have limbo, you no longer have this huge basis of guilt that is the entire foundation of Catholicism. So how far can you take it before it just ceases to have no point at all?
Yeah, I don't really see how science could disprove religious faith. But as you said, I see how it could strengthen it. And this is what the Catholic Church teaches. It says that there is only one thing that we can, one conclusion that is relevant for science that we can reach without science. And that is that there was, and before you start throwing things at me, let me explain it further. There was a creator. Now, this should not be confused with that Earth was created 6,000 years ago in 6 days or anything. It fully accepts the Big Bang Theory, and if science takes it further, it will accept that. But the idea is that nature exists. There was a point in time, was a complicated way of expressing it, when nature came into existence. Now, when nature came into existence, that is when the laws of nature came into existence. There weren't laws of nature prior to nature. So we cannot explain how nature came into existence with reference to the laws of nature. So the Catholic Church then says that it must have been something outside of nature that caused nature. And that which is outside of nature, and it's almost a semantic claim, that which is outside of nature that caused nature, we call God. And that is the only thing that the Catholic Church teaches that we can actually defend rationally. Everything else is irrational. Everything else is based on faith. So there are no Catholics that would try to argue with Lawrence or anybody else when it comes to the miracles and try to prove by rationality and scientific methods that no, they actually happened. Doesn't exist. The only one claim is that outside of nature was a cause for nature. And I find it very difficult to come around that to get around that conclusion. And that which was outside of nature, that caused nature, caused something that was orderly, beautiful. Maybe by chance, maybe not. That is like the difference between if you semantically call it God or if you semantically call it I have no idea whatsoever. So that is how I think that science can strengthen faith. The more science reveals of the beauty of nature, the more flabbergasting it becomes to think of that which was outside of nature that caused this. And I can't see how anybody can get around the fact that it must have been something outside of nature that caused nature.
Well, look, I'm going to have to go in a minute, but let me just spend 10 seconds or 15 seconds. Can I just
Could you please, yes, why don't you make your closing remark now?
Okay, I'll
then?
make it in 30 seconds because I have it trained at 10.
Add a brief question to that, or one which I hope can have a brief answer at least. And it's a question which I'd like to address to both of you really. Because it's becoming quite clear what kind of world you would like to see, I think, in terms of the relationship between science and faith. But the question is, regardless of what kind of world you hope for, what do you believe to be the future of science and religion? Or rather, what is the future of religion, I should ask? I know that Roland has once said that it's here to stay. It's always been here and it's not going away. So could you both please comment?
Why don't you give Roland the first chance and I'll finish?
Okay.
Since he had the first chance.
Okay, we can
to
do
start.
like that.
What
What is the future of religion in the world?
It's an immensely difficult question to answer
Yes, I realize
because
that.
it's so intertwined with political, economical power struggles. Lawrence mentioned the Crusades, which were religiously motivated, but also very, very much politically motivated.
So religion and politics have been tied
so,
together.
yeah, they just like science and politics are entwined, so is religion and politics. So to answer where is religion heading is to answer where is the world heading. I don't see a future where religion can be separated from culture, science, politics, power plays, everything. So if I wanted to believe something, it would be that religion is heading towards where it gives less and less room for fundamentalist violence, oppression. I think that if we were to look at history and draw out the line, we would see that religion has moved in that direction, and hopefully it will continue to do so. But again, everything else will determine that also.
Okay, thank you. That's a very hopeful perspective.
Can I? Yeah,
sure,
okay.
yes, please.
Good. And no more questions after this. Okay, good. So I'd like to, okay. First, I don't make any predictions about anything less than 2 trillion years in the future, okay? It's just a policy for mine. First, it's easier to do that, and secondly, no one will be around to test them, so I can do it. However, it is an empirical fact that in the first world, religious belief is at least people identify religion as decreasing. You could draw a line and argue that it'll go to 0 at some point. It's very difficult to do, not because it's so ingrained in our institutional framework, but there's no doubt that religious beliefs are decreasing in the first world. Whether that happens universally will depend on a lot of socio-political issues that I can't describe. But what is amazing is that somehow, correlated with education, is a decrease in religion, which is one of the great things about education. I just want to add one thing, though, at the end, which I think is really important, this supernatural thing. Okay, that's part of the problem. Is that the church, of course, bases its ideas on notions that are ill-defined because it didn't do science. So what did they mean by nature? So outside of nature, well, if there are many universes, then you can say outside of nature is outside of our universe. And then the point is that you have to make your definitions be based on what we're learning about reality, and it's science as it's providing it. That's why I wrote a whole book to show that you don't need anything supernatural to create a universe. And moreover, the notion of cause, which is so central to religion, is potentially irrelevant. Because, for example, if time began with the Big Bang, there was no cause, because cause and effect require a causal relationship. If time began with the Big Bang, then our way of thinking about the universe has to use different concepts. We may not like that, but we're forced to. And certainly the reaction, for example, into my last book, about what we mean by nothing, people object to it because they don't like it. But changing our definition of reality is called learning, and that's what science is all about. I have to go. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let me just thank you so very much then for this highly interesting discussion. Thank you both for being here, sharing your vast knowledge and very interesting insights, and making clear where the boundaries run, so to speak. And thank you for committing to the way of dialogue and discussion. I think the importance of this can't be stressed strongly enough. Thank you.